Hello, I'm Max from Not a Drama, and in this video we're going to see something a little different. I'm going to show you how I edit pictures in Photoshop. I'm not a professional editor or a professional photographer, but there are a few tips that I think will be useful to know if you start to edit your pictures. You may be tempted to edit your pictures in applications such as Lightroom, which is very easy and good for a quick result, but doesn't give you really fine control. So let's see what you can do in Photoshop, which is impossible to do in Lightroom. So here I have this image of my son, and this is the original edit that I did. As you can see, much more pleasant colors, much better sharpness, right? So I went from this to this. Now, what about these three dots? Well, that's just to explain you something. So we're going to understand how to work with channels when editing your pictures. So Photoshop is working with the RGB channels, the red, green and blue channel. And these allow you to work specifically on just certain part of the image, so just the reds, just the greens or just the blues, something that is impossible to achieve in Lightroom. So if you don't see the channels, just be sure that in the views, in the window, you actually enable channels and they will appear somewhere here in the right side of Photoshop. Depends which type of layout you use, you have them in different positions. But the main thing, bring up the channels. And what channels are? So as you can see, if I go for example in the blue channel, the blue dot is becoming fully white, right? If you understand how masks work, you know that white is where you have the most of the information, black is where you don't have any information, right? So as you can see, Photoshop, see these, all the blacks, right? The more black it is, the more white it is, the more blue it is, right? So this may not make too much sense when you see the image in colors, but that is how actually Photoshop interpret the blue channel, right? So as a proof, right, if we go then to the green is fully white. If we go then to the red, right, the red is fully white. Although you see the green is not completely black, there is still information in the red channel as well regarding to the green, right? So it's not truly like how we perceive colors, it's more how digitally Photoshop is working with the colors in the images. But these allow you to have a very fine tuning on the images. So what I normally do when I work on my images, so the main thing is first of all to work with a little bit of contrast, and I'm going to do that by working with the curves layer. So I select my background, and if I'm going to create a curve layer, right, here I have my curve. If I change the information of the curve, right, I can change the contrast of the image, but at the moment I'm affecting everything in the image, every color, right? Now, because this is actually a portrait, I would like to have my curves to mainly work on the red channel, right? So how do I going to do that? Well, you can quickly select the highlights of anything in Photoshop by holding down the Control key and clicking on what you want to select. So you see I'm holding out Control key, right? And then I'm going to click on the red channel, and Photoshop is selecting the red channel, right? So when I create a new layer adjustment and I do a curve, the layer is automatically created with the actual mask of the red channel. So now if I'm going to change the contrast, I'm going to affect primarily, right, the red channel, right? This is very important when you work in images, because then you can select which channels you want to work on when you add an adjustment layer. Now we are working with curves, but can be any other adjustment layer. So if you have a landscape, you may want to work maybe on the greens or on the blues. If you have portraits, you may want to work in the reds. If you have a very generic image, or you want to work on any of those things, you may want to select the entire RGB, right? So you select all the colors. But basically, by creating our mask, we are actually having here the highlights, okay? So when we are moving our curves, we are affecting mainly the highlights of the image, right? So if you check the highlights here and here and here, right? as you can see, the highlights are affected a lot. Also the shadows obviously are affected, but mostly the highlights are affected. So what if we want then to work with the contrast on the shadows? Well, all you have to do is to duplicate your curve layer, and then you see we are on the mask and we do Ctrl I to invert our mask, and here now we are working on the shadows, right? So when I change this, I'm mainly working on the shadows. So by doing this, I can actually fine-tune the contrast on my image, right? Once I'm happy with the contrast of the image, what I do is adding a selective color control layer. Now the selective color control layer is incredibly powerful. So we select our image and we add a selective color. What selective color allows us to do is to change the level of colors by each color. So you see we are in the reds here. So if I do a little bit of cyan, a lot of magenta, a lot of yellow, I change how the reds are actually being displayed, right? If I remove all the yellows, my reds are becoming basically violet, right? So obviously with a color image you cannot be so crazy, and especially when there are skin tones you need to be very careful and very subtle on your adjustment. But you see how precisely I can change the colors here. And here I'm not working on a specific channel, my mask is white, right? But I'm already working on specific colors. The black levels is basically how much red you want to print, 0 or you want to print 100% of reds. Look at the red dot becoming completely without any color and then full of color, right? So again, I choose the levels that I like, and I'm going to do this for each channel. Now, I cannot lose now too much time here on a different colors, but you get the idea, right? If I go to the white, then I'm going to affect a lot the highlights, right? So look here, fully white, and then I can close off my highlights. They don't look as overexposed, and as you can see, it's not adding any artifact. It's very precisely working with the color information in the image, right? So this is absolutely powerful. And if you change the colors in the whites, right, you change the colors of the highlights, right? So I can make my highlights more cold or not so cold, and as you can see, I have a full control on the highlights. So if you can see here, right, my highlight is green. If I do this, my highlight is red. Obviously you cannot go as that crazy, right? You need to do it within reasons, but you have an incredible control. Then with the neutrals is much more dramatic anything you do, right? Because it's affecting the most of the image, especially with the colors. You have immediately a very destructive impact on the image, right? So you need to be very careful with the neutrals. And then with the blacks you can have cool, you know, low contrast effects. You can have a very high contrast effect, right? And by working on the colors as well, you actually change the feeling, right, of your shadows. And you see how I close the shadows a lot, but then by bringing back the magenta, right, I can still bring detail back in the shadow, right? And by lower down the cyan, right, they are not going to be bluish, right, but they're having a color that makes sense to me, right? So as you can see, the selective color is extremely powerful, right? Especially when you work in black and white, and then we're going to see then at the end how to do also a black and white version of the image. Now the next thing I do once I'm happy with my contrast and my color balance is to actually add sharpness. So how do I do that? Well, first of all, now that we are happy with our edits, we need to flatten them up in one layer. So we do Ctrl Alt Shift and E, and this is creating a flat layer. So you see, if I don't have my control layers, my image is going back to normal, but all the image is being flattened with all the adjustments, right? So we leave this on, right? because what we are going to do now, we are going to mask this with the highlights. So we control click on RGB, and then we click on our mask and we generate a mask. Then we go into our image and we are finally able to go into filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, and we can go as crazy as 500%, right? It's bringing up a little bit of noise, but you know, I don't mind. I like this type of noise. It doesn't look like a digital noise, right? But if you're bothered by that, obviously you can tune it down. You always leave the radius to 1 pixel, but then you can play around with the amount, right? So I'm happy with 500%. And if I'm zooming in the image, and if you look, for example, at the hair, right? And if I turn on the sharpness, look how soft the image is and how much more sharp, how alive is coming back, right? So this is the color version of the image. Now, if you're going to do a black and white, you can get even more crazy with your selective color adjustments. So get rid of this for the moment. And let's do a black and white. How you do a black and white? Well, we do a new layer, Control-Shift-N, and then we just ensure that our layer is getting color black, right? So I selected by clicking here the black color, and then Alt backspace, I color the layer black, and then I'm changing the overlay to color. There you go. And why this is very cool? Because our colors are there, our red, green and blues are there, right? So we can still work with the information we have in the image from the colors, and that is going to affect the black and white version. So if I double click here on the selective color, then I can go more crazy, right? Because not having the colors allow me to do things that in colors will not make much more sense, but in black and white they make more sense, because there's no colors involved, right? So you don't see it. So if I go, for example, in the reds, right, I can bring back a lot of detail there. And as you can see, you have such a fine-tuned control on how your black and white is going to be. And obviously you can then change the mask of the selected color to work on specific areas if you want, by brushing in or brushing out, right? But you see the level of control you have with the selected color and the black and white. And if you want to sharpen this, again, Control-Alt-Shift-E to bring my flattened version of the image, selecting the highlights with control clicking on RGB, creating my mask, selecting back on the layer, and I'm reapplying the unsharp mask and have the sharpened version of the image. So I hope this was easy enough to follow. I hope with editing this video I will make it easy enough to understand. But the main concept is to select a channel, so that will be the mask of your adjustment layer. And the main adjustment layer I'm using is just curves, and then I'm inverting the mask, so I'm working on the highlights and the shadows. And then I'm doing a selective color, which gives you a great control on the look and feel of the image and the overall colors of the image. And that is very powerful as well when you add a black layer, so that you can make your images black and white. So I hope this was useful. Let me know if you like these types of videos in my channel. If so, thumbs up, and if you feel like, please subscribe. Thank you and see you next time.